Wow, I think I'm just going to stop right now. Thank you. Thank you for just an incredibly warm, generous welcome to this historic hall. It's a great honor for me to be here. Rob, where'd you run off to? Where'd you go? Thank you so much for your introduction. And Warden McMillan, thank you very much. I appreciated being at St. Anthony's for lunch and grilled, me, that is. Baroness Kathy Ashton, my good friend, thank you so much for your incredible work for several years as you helped shape and get us down the road on the Iran nuclear agreement. And everybody here, I think, joins me in saying thank you for your many, many labors as the EU High Representative. We're very grateful. Thank you. I want to ask you all to join me in recognizing the United States Ambassador to Great Britain, to the Court of St. James. Matthew Barzun is sitting over here in the front of And before I begin, I want to give a special shout out to my Chief of Staff, John Feiner, who's now miserable that I'm doing this. But he wears his second hat as the State Department Director of Policy and Planning. And I love him. He played hockey in New England. We both come from New England. He also played soccer. We both love both games and both play them. But as you know, I went to a college in New Haven, Connecticut. And John somehow got lost on his way to college and found himself at this small college in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And if you think the Cambridge-Oxford rivalry is hot, folks, Harvard-Yale is no slouch, let me tell you. And that said, I have to tell you that John offers a unique blend of intellect, humor, prose, and I will give him a pass for his wayward education. Because of a simple fact. Besides having achieved the rare honor of getting a mail-order diploma, he is also a Rhodes Scholar, folks. And he loves Oxford, and he loved his time here, and I want you all to say thank you for this alumnus of Oxford. Now, to all of you union members, I really am pleased to stand here. I had the privilege of serving as the president of the Yale Political Union, which is modeled on the Oxford Union. And it's a great privilege for me to be able to be here, to stand where so many speakers have stood before, distinguished speakers, Robert Kennedy, Winston Churchill, Mother Teresa, the woman who plays Crazy Eyes on the Netflix show, Orange is the New Black. Now that's great company to be in. I know that some of you have also been waging a very energetic campaign, a creative campaign, to bring another tall, thin American to this hall. So I apologize to anybody who was disappointed that I am not, in fact, Taylor Swift. If I thought I would make you feel any better, I'd have been happy to sing a few bars of Shake It Off. But I decided not to put you through that. I didn't come here to torture you. And whether you disagree with me or agree with me this afternoon, I just want you all to know that I have done you an enormous favor by not bringing my guitar. Now, under any circumstances, it is a special thing to be here at Oxford today for me. Had a chance to walk around a little bit. I had lunch at St. Anthony's that I mentioned. I chatted with a few of the students there. And this reminds me a lot of my alma mater, Yale. And of course, that's probably because Yale's campus was actually designed to make it look as much like Oxford as possible. In fact, at one point, an architect actually poured acid over the walls of Yale's Harkness Tower in order to replicate the centuries of soot and sludge on Oxford's old college. Now in America, we call that character. Sort of like buying brand new jeans that already have holes in the knees, it's the same kind of thing. But Oxford University, needless to say, and the Oxford Union are the real deal. And I'm delighted to be here, particularly because we meet at such a critical time. Let me take a moment to put that in context. Consider that 75 years ago last night, under a full moon, more than 500 Nazi warplanes launched one of the most destructive air raids of the Second World War. Bombs tore through London's residential neighborhoods, including, I might add, the apartment building in which my American grandmother then lived, though she thankfully wasn't home when they hit. Explosions rocked Westminster Abbey, Parliament, blew a hole in one of the most magnificent roofs in the world, the arches and the oaken beams of Westminster Hall. At the time, the Third Reich controlled virtually all of Europe. Great Britain and the refugee fighters who gathered here stood seemingly alone against perhaps the greatest evil the world has ever known. But Great Britain fought back. And shortly after the Blitz, Labor Minister Ernest Bevin declared, "Our bombers are growing in size and carrying capacity. Our science is developing more rapidly than theirs. We are on the upgrade. Never mind the croakers," he said, "we are winning." And indeed, we did. But as we all know too well, the joy and the relief of VE Day, whose anniversary we just celebrated a couple days ago, were soon tempered by the emergence of a new division in Europe and the descent, in Churchill's phrase, of an iron curtain that separated free from unfree, Soviet satellites from NATO allies. This was the bipolar world in which my generation grew up, came of age. And during the time when my father was a member of America's Foreign Service, our family moved to Berlin, where I got a child's eye view of East-West tensions, especially when I rode my bicycle without permission into the communist sector and was promptly grounded by my dad, who informed me that I could have been an international incident. Now, later, I was an 18-year-old freshman at Yale during the Cuban Missile Crisis. 19, when President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. 22, when I joined the Navy, and 23, when I deployed for my first tour in Vietnam. By the time the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, I was in my 40s and serving in the United States Senate. And the Cold War had significantly shaped my worldview throughout those formative years. The stakes of that period inevitably felt incredibly high because they were. But it was also a time when the challenges and what to do about them were pretty clear. And when the primary forces shaping our world were leaders of recognized states. When we went to war in that era, we fought an enemy army in uniform that was answerable to an established government with a known address. We could pull out a world map and color each state clearly, our friends, our foes, the non-aligned, the ideological fault line between freedom and authoritarianism was just as clear as those colors on a map and the lines that were drawn with them. And the world that confronts us today, confronts you today, as you prepare, many of you to leave here and some of you to spend a few more years, but ultimately to go out and make a difference. The world that confronts us today is in many ways much more complicated. Henry Kissinger, who wrote one of the greatest books on diplomacy, called Diplomacy, told me not so long ago, a few months ago, that he thought this was far more complicated, much more different. Non-state actors compete with national governments for influence and power. The cliche of technology bringing the world closer is in fact a stark reality in a world filled with extremism and conflict, disturbing images and outright lies, can circle the globe in an instant. Conflicts are fought using an eclectic mix of weapons, and often by combatants who are difficult to distinguish from ordinary civilians. And while the world as a whole is more prosperous than it has ever been, inequality has also grown in almost every single country, fueling instability. Weak or corrupt governance has led to an increasing number of failed or failing states, robbing too many citizens of the economic opportunity and a hopeful future. And all the while, climate change, a decidedly different challenge, but one that is existential, is already impacting our daily lives, giving us a preview of the planet-wide catastrophe that we will face if we don't change course. And the complexity of all of this is enough to make some people just want to climb back into bed, pull the sheets up over your head, and wish that everything would disappear. But that's not how you solve anything, folks, except maybe a hangover. Amid the crush of daily events, it is really important to step back and to consider the full range of what we are up against. Now, I've spent more than 2,300 hours, or a full 96 days, on a plane since I took this job. And that is a lot of long flights where one can take the time to sit and think. And while there are literally dozens of issues that cross my desk every day, as I see it, there are three that leap out as interrelated but distinct, and they are generational challenges. All three demand urgent and unified action by the global community because they cannot be solved by one country alone. And all three will require not just years, but decades of international cooperation in order to resolve them. And all three must matter to every single one of us because they are the challenges that will shape the world that our children and grandchildren will inherit. Now, the first of these challenges, pretty obvious, I suspect, because it dominates the headlines today here in Europe and around the world. And that is the need to counter and overcome the forces that seek to impose a radical extremism on us all. Not a single country endorses the kind of vicious and indiscriminate violence perpetrated by such groups as ISIL or Daesh, or groups like Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, and others in West Africa or in the Persian Peninsula, the Arab Peninsula, Arabian Peninsula. In fact, it is opposition to these terrorists that is bringing governments and people together in every region. And that is exactly as it ought to be because those thugs are the living definition of evil. The kind of evil that I described that Great Britain fought back against so hard in World War II. Let me just emphasize to you that the crimes of these people go way beyond theft and destruction. They're smugglers, extorters. They destroy cultural treasures. They attack history itself. They attack schools. They butcher teachers, murder innocent journalists, abduct young boys and turn them into killers, auction off terrified girls in modern-day slave markets with notarized sales contracts, and use the term marriage to describe what is actually sanctioned, even encouraged, systematic rape. This is Daesh's standard practice. And they have built a bureaucracy out of brutality, systematically murdering Christians, Yazidis, Shias, and others because of where they're from and because of who they are, because of what they believe. A reign of terror which in my estimation amounts to genocide. So together, we must defeat Daesh, its affiliates, and its imitators. It may surprise you, but all the evidence indicates that we are on the path to doing just that. The international coalition to counter Daesh is now 66 members strong. Its members are drawn from every single corner of the globe, and all are taking on different aspects of this fight, dividing up the responsibilities and dividing up its effectiveness. To date, the coalition has conducted more than 12,000 airstrikes. The United States and others have put special forces on the ground in Syria and Iraq to advise, train, and better equip our local partners for the challenges ahead. Together, we have already pushed Daesh out of roughly 1/3 of the territory that it once controlled in Iraq and Syria, and we're hammering Daesh's heavy weapons, its training camps, its supply routes, its infrastructure, increasingly pressuring and isolating its so-called capitals in Raqqa and Mosul. And the military campaign to end Daesh's terrorism is only expanding. We are also destroying Daesh's economic lifeline. We are targeting and hitting the terrorists' oil production, their refining facilities, their tanker trucks, their cash centers, their illicit banking hubs, and already they have had to reduce the paychecks to their fighters by 50%. So Daesh is losing ground. Not as fast as some of us would like, but losing ground. Losing leaders, losing fighters, losing cash. And you know what? They're losing confidence as well. A week ago, Daesh beheaded 4 teenagers, young teenagers, 13, 14, in Raqqa, kids, because they feared they might be some sort of spies. Haul them out in the square, slash their heads off for everybody to see and terrorize people. Kids. And as a result, we know from survivors, defectors, and intelligence reports that members of Daesh's rank and file are also now losing hope. But we also know that beating Daesh on the battlefield in Iraq and Syria is only the beginning of what we must do. As Henry David Thoreau wrote, there are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil to only one who is striking at the root. So we have to strike at the root causes of violent extremism. And we can't do that unless we first understand what those causes are. Since the fighting broke out in 2011, at least 800 Britons have left this country to join Daesh. 17-year-old Tala Asma was an A student at his West Yorkshire high school. But in the spring of his senior year, Tala and his next-door neighbor left for Syria. A couple of months later, he detonated a Toyota Land Cruiser full of explosives at an Iraqi oil refinery, killing himself and 11 others. It may be disconcerting, I know it is, in fact, but it's nonetheless true that some of these terrorists or would-be terrorists are our neighbors, in America too, in Australia, in Germany, in France, Belgium. Men and women, and yes, children from our communities who are somehow coming to the conclusion that Daesh or another terrorist group is their destiny, not Oxford or a job or a future. Now, some individuals we know are driven by tribal or sectarian allegiances, others in response to oppression. For example, for years now, Assad's iron-fisted rule has played right into the Daesh recruitment strategy, particularly among Sunnis who view Assad as an existential threat to their communities. And having made peaceful change impossible, Assad made violence inevitable. And he thereby paved the way for Daesh to emerge and feed off each other, with the cruelty of each driving the desperate into the poisonous embrace of the other. I want to underscore the biggest blow that we could conceivably deal to Daesh would be to end the war between the regime and the opposition and bring about a political transition in Syria. And that is why the United States and the UK and 18 other nations, including Saudi Arabia, Iran, and every major country with a direct interest and stake in Syria, have all come together to form the International Syria Support Group. For the first time since the conflict began 5 years ago, we have brought all the key international players to the same table. Impossible a year ago. We have negotiated a cessation of hostilities and deliveries of aid that, yes, has been violated in places, and at one point a few days ago was very fragile. But we have reduced the violence. We have helped save thousands of lives. And we continue now to push for the only viable long-term solution to this terrible conflict, which is a political transition away from Assad. We had a spirited discussion at lunch today about, why can't you deal with Assad? Why can't you make something happen? Well, it's very simple, folks. Even if we wanted to, you couldn't end the war that way because of what Assad has done, because of 12 million people who've been now dislodged and displaced and refugeed, and because Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, others will not stop because of Assad's presence. The quicker we help to end this conflict, the quicker we will alleviate the suffering of the Syrian people, and the quicker we can all focus on eliminating Daesh from Iraq and Syria. Now, we also know that some people are radicalized for reasons that have very, little to do with religion or politics. Some people become terrorists because they have trouble finding meaning in life or economic opportunity in their daily lives, because they're deeply frustrated, because they hope that groups like Daesh is somehow going to give them a sense of identity or purpose or power that they have not received from the normal currency of their lives. It isn't complicated. When people, and particularly young people, have no hope for the future and no faith in legitimate authority, when there are no outlets for people to express their concerns, frustration festers. And no one knows that better than violent extremist groups which regularly use indignity and marginalization and inequality and corruption as a super easy recruitment tool. Therefore, the second great challenge that we face together today is overcoming the virulent bad governance that persists in too many places. The failed and failing states I talked about. We need to do this because we need to build strong, sustainable, global economy that unlocks opportunity rather than stifling it. Any government's most basic duty, you all have, I'm sure, debated this at length in one class or another, the rights of man and the evolution of human power on earth and governance. The most basic duty is to meet the needs of your citizens. When governments are fragile and leaders are incompetent, or worse, dishonest, when the gap between rich and poor grows and the space for basic freedoms shrinks, when corruption is not an aberration but an entrenched part of society, the needs of citizens cannot be met. Weak or corrupt governance invariably leaves young people caught up in a race between hope and frustration. And it's absolutely essential that hope wins that race. Think about it this way. Worldwide, there are nearly 2 billion people who are younger than 15 years old. In the Middle East, that includes 3 out of every 10 people. In parts of Africa, such as Niger and Somalia, the DRC, roughly half the population is under 15. It matters to all of us whether these kids are going to be able to access education, have a job, find an opportunity that enables them to be able to contribute to their community in beneficial ways. It matters because today's globalized economy sees a connection, an intimate connection, in fact, between how we each do and how we all do. Partly because from a moral standpoint, giving young people a chance to succeed is simply the right thing to do. But guess what? It also matters because these young people are essentially swing voters in the fight against violent extremism. We need them to make wise choices. And yet, that is a lot less likely if they grow up without faith in government, without an education, without the chance for a better life. And that means that governments have to break down barriers to innovation. It means making it easier to start up a business. It means improving the climate for foreign investment. It means streamlining bureaucracies and preventing military cronies from crowding out private enterprise. It means giving women and girls an equal chance to compete in the classroom and in the workplace. And this is the only way we are going to meet the needs of the modern world, plain and simple. It also means making the fight against corruption a global security priority of the first order. Bribery, fraud, other forms of venality feed organized crime. Those are your narcotics traffickers, those are your arms traffickers, and those are often the greatest links to terrorist networks. They contribute to human trafficking, discourage honest and accountable investment. They undermine entire communities. Now, I don't have any illusions. I used to be a prosecutor. I understand that corruption is as old as government itself. Every nation, including mine, the United States, has wrestled at some point, to a greater or lesser degree, with corruption of one point or another. But today, the cost of corruption globally is exploding, and it's exploding everywhere. In the Middle East, a recent survey found that fully 1/3 of citizens had to pay a bribe in order to get a supposedly free government service. In Ukraine, under the previous government, corrupt governance helped trigger an international crisis, and we're still engaged in it. In Cameroon, a senior inspector of police was arrested for selling local ID cards to Boko Haram, to the militants coming in from Nigeria. And just last week in Pakistan, officers seized currency and gold worth nearly $6.5 million from the home of a senior official in Baluchistan province. Now, the good news is that more and more citizens around the world are saying no to this runaway corruption. We saw this in Guatemala City last year, when thousands of citizens gathered in the central square every Sunday, rain or shine, to protest the venality that they knew was taking place at the highest levels of their government. And with the help of some courageous national prosecutors, they exposed a sitting vice president and then a sitting president. And they put their country's political leaders on notice for many years to come. Tomorrow, I will have the privilege of attending Prime Minister Cameron's Anti-Corruption Summit in London. And we're going to discuss the various ways that the international community can help citizens of the world to address this challenge. For our part, just last week, President Obama proposed new legislation that would, for the first time, require all 50 states to collect information on shell companies for law enforcement to be able to use, and shed greater light on real estate transactions in cities like Miami or New York, which are used too often to shelter illicit funds. And we have to stop and ask on an international basis how it is that a bunch of generals in a country like Nigeria, which had happened previously, and the new president has run against all of this, and we're working with him now to change it. But Nigeria saw tens of billions of dollars taken out of the country. Those were schools, those were healthcare, those were infrastructure. There was new jobs hidden in bank accounts around the world. Over the last 4 years, U.S. foreign assistance for anti-corruption programs has more than doubled. And today we're working in dozens of countries to help build online automated business registries, which will reduce both the red tape and the opportunities for graft, to hold people up for the bribe. We're also expanding programs that send American judges overseas to share best practices. And we're developing better intelligence on kleptocrats and their networks in order to deny bad actors the profits from graft and more. Now, I will have more to say about this at tomorrow's summit, but for now, let me just underscore, despite recent progress as a global community, we just are not doing nearly enough to eliminate this scourge. And that needs to change if we're going to have a chance of addressing the concerns of those 2 billion young people. Because we all pay for it. You pay for it. We pay for it. Corruption costs the global economy about $2.6 trillion a year. That's $2.6 trillion that be going towards the infrastructure, towards healthcare, towards education, towards food security initiatives, or any number of areas where additional funding is desperately needed. You can buy a lot with $2.6 trillion. In fact, that's about 10 times the total amount the international community spends each year on all development assistance. Think of the difference we could make. Now, the magnitude of corruption that exists today is not just disgraceful, it's also dangerous. There is nothing more demoralizing, more destructive, more disempowering to any citizen than the belief that the system is rigged against them and that people in positions of power, to use a diplomatic term, are crooks who are embezzling the future of their own people and, by the way, depositing their ill-gotten gains in financial institutions that claim respectability. Good, responsible governance is supposed to protect citizens' future, not pillage it. And that's as true about the economy as it is about the environment. Now, I know that to some people, because I've been at this a long time, when I first came back from Vietnam, I took part in the Earth Day, first Earth Day in America, 1970. And we've been at it ever since, trying to change things. And I know that some people still think environmental protection is a fringe issue. But the fact is that because of ignorance at first, and more recently the irresponsibility of vested interests that have consciously sought to obscure the facts in pursuit of their own short-sighted greed, the fragile home that all of us share today is changing in alarming ways. That's why today's third and final generational challenge is to finally step up and deal with the widespread environmental degradation taking place around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, in just the past 40 years, we human beings have wiped out fully 1/2 of marine vertebrates. The vast majority of the world's fish stocks are either fully exploited or overfished. We're adding millions of tons of plastic trash into the ocean every year. At this point, our ocean is so polluted that hundreds of dead zones exist where life simply cannot exist. On land, we are destroying the equivalent of 16 or 17 football fields of forest every minute. And because of the obscene amount of pollution that we allow into the air over the years, today 3.5 billion of the world's population live in communities that fall short of the air quality standards that are set by the World Health Organization. And of course, on top of these troubling statistics, there's the greatest threat that our planet has faced in modern history, in all of our history, climate change. Week after week, month after month, year after year, we continue to see new evidence of the danger that climate change poses to our planet. We learned recently that 2015 was the hottest year in recorded history, by far, after knowing that the decade before that was the hottest on record, and the one before that, the second hottest on record, and the one before that, the third hottest on record. And when does somebody stop and say enough? And now we already know this year is already on track to be the warmest of all. Now, most of you here are under the age of 30. And those of you who are may not be aware of it, but you haven't lived through one single month in your life, not one, that was cooler than its 20th century average. The facts are staggering. And yet, despite all the science, one of my former colleagues thought it would be persuasive to walk onto the floor of the United States Senate with a snowball in his hand and point to it as evidence that climate change is a hoax. I hate to tell you, folks, it proves something for sure, but not what he intended. Thankfully, as we saw in Paris last December, most of the world understands the severity of this threat and is moving decisively towards collective action to fix it. The Paris Climate Change Agreement that I had the privilege of signing with my granddaughter in my lap in New York a few days ago is important not because the text in and of itself is going to guarantee that we keep the level of temperature at 2 degrees centigrade and don't get the tipping point. That's not what it absolutely guarantees. It doesn't mean we'll avoid the worst effects of climate change. The Paris Agreement is important because of the clear signal it sends from nearly 200 nations to all sectors of the global economy that the future will and must be fueled by cleaner energy sources. Now, today we know the new energy future, the efficiencies, the alternative sources, the clean options, none of what we must achieve is beyond our capacity. It isn't as if we're sitting here stumped by a mathematical equation we can't figure out or by some, logarithm that was yet to be discovered. That's not the situation. There's only one question. Is doing something and what we need to do beyond our collective resolve? And happily, there is now growing body of evidence that we're beginning to move in the right direction. Last year, global investment in renewable energy was at an all-time high, nearly $330 billion. For the first time in history, despite the low price of coal and oil and gas, more of the world's money was spent fostering renewable energy technologies than on new fossil fuel plants. So we're starting to break through. And by the middle of this century, it is projected that roughly $50 trillion will be invested in new energy, and the vast majority of that in clean energy. Now, if these numbers don't, as raw numbers, mean something to you, here's the upshot. The clean energy market of the future is the largest market the world has ever seen. My state of Massachusetts made a lot of money in the 1990s because we're a tech state. And we were riding the crest of computers and communications and so forth, not as much as a couple of other states, California, Texas, others. That economic energy of the 1990s created more wealth in our nation than at any time since the 1920s when we didn't have an income tax. And every single quintile of American taxpayer saw their income go up. Everybody. It was a $1 trillion market with 1 billion users. The energy market today, 4 to 5 billion users today. It's going to go up to 9 billion users if we do what we can do. And it is in the multi-trillions of dollars in the size of market. So if, in the spirit of Paris, we continue to pursue solutions together, the enormous economic benefits of that market is going to be felt by people everywhere. And the good news is this cooperation is actually written right into the Paris Agreement, because we all understand that this is in fact a generational challenge, and it will take a full generation to address what has to be done. And the Paris Agreement requires ongoing international collaboration, calling on the parties to ramp up their climate plans every 5 years, with a mandatory requirement that people engage in a measurement and then the ramp up. So our collective response actually gets stronger and stronger as time passes and technology evolves. Now, ultimately, our success is going to depend on whether we keep our eye on the ball and maintain the momentum that finally exists today. And in the time ahead, we are going to need an all-out global commitment, not only to clean energy, but to clean air, clean harbors, clean coasts, and the preservation of our endangered ocean and marine resources. Now, if you think current conflicts are all-consuming, imagine what happens when we add food shortages, water shortages, stronger storms, longer droughts, steady rises in sea levels, which are already being predicted, and entire countries swallowed by the sea. If we don't make the choices available to us today, then the problems of today are going to pale in comparison to what's coming down the road. And we don't hear a lot of people, not enough people, laying those real choices in front of you. The bottom line is that we don't have to sit here and wait for this to happen. If we accelerate the transition towards clean energy solutions, We have the technology, we have the knowledge. Solar has now moved down. I saw contracts the other day that are being sold at about 3 cents, 3 point something cents per kilowatt hour, less than that. In one case, Saudi Arabia did a solar contract for 2.9, I think it is. That is totally more than competitive with coal and other sources. But a lot of countries can't afford to do it. They need to make the transition. And I believe, President Obama believes, that the global community needs to come together in order to help them do it. If we do this, we have time to prevent the worst impacts of climate change. And the solution here is not a mystery. Our planet is not predestined for destruction. It is, as President Kennedy reminded us, in our hands when he said in his inauguration that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own. And you can look in any scripture of any religion or any philosophy of life, and it will tell you something about creation preservation and the importance of our respect for our environment. So my friends, the same is true for each of the other challenges that I addressed today. There is nothing inevitable about succumbing to the problems that we confront. Nothing. Each is a product of a human choice or lack of choice. And what we have the power to choose, we have the power to change. And that is why I am confident that in our collective ability, we can meet these challenges. And when you consider that the university that you attend predates not only the founding of my nation, but also the Reformation, the Renaissance, the Magna Carta, you consider that this institution survived the Black Death, endured the War of the Roses, the Great War, and the Blitz. Come on. I think it's a little easier on this campus than elsewhere to put things in perspective. And I'm sure you do. Oxford has stood through it all, with a history that reaches back to the Middle Ages. Or in other words, the last time a subfusk was in fashion. So, because of the creativity and the persistence of previous generations, we actually have huge advantages over them, over all of that history that I just talked about. A child today is more likely to be born healthy, more likely to be adequately fed, more likely to get the necessary vaccinations, more likely to attend school, more likely to actually live a long life than any earlier generation. We are the beneficiaries, you are the beneficiaries of incredible breakthroughs in medicine, in education, communications, transportation, food production. You name it. And meanwhile, the number of nuclear weapons has fallen by 2/3 in the last 30 years, while the number of democracies has doubled. That is called progress. Amidst all the cacophony of talking heads on TV and the sort of sense of doom and gloom, we are making progress. So on that note, let me just underscore to you, we who live in countries like the United States and the United Kingdom have actually one more significant advantage. For centuries, mankind has seen governments come and governments go. Virtually every form of government imagined has been attempted somewhere, from totalitarianism to socialism, monarchy, constitutional monarchy, military junta, theocracy, republic. It isn't a coincidence that the course of history has led so much of the modern world to settle on democracy. And no one put it better, as usual, than Winston Churchill, born less than 10 miles from here, who called democracy the worst form of government there is, except for all the others. Democracy can be noisy, frustrating, and occasionally chaotic. But the genius in democracy is that it carries within itself the remedy for its own shortcomings. Wrong policies can, through a process of open debate, which you cherish here in the Oxford Union, be replaced by better policies. Poor leaders can, through a process of free and fair elections, be replaced by better ones. And we have a reason, I think, to look to the future not only with resolve, but with confidence. And with the understanding that there is much we can accomplish if we just dare to push the limits. If you don't believe me, ask Leicester City fans. Or consider the words of another American who studied here many years ago, T.S. Eliot. Only those who will risk going too far, he said, can possibly find out how far one can go. So each of you will leave this university with a different path in mind. Some of you may decide to work in government. Others may continue on in academia. The world is moving so fast now that I guarantee you, many of you will embark on a career in a company not yet founded, using devices not yet developed, based on ideas not yet conceived. But no matter where you end up, no matter what you choose to do, don't underestimate the power that you have to make a difference. Participation is the best antidote to pessimism. If you have questions, ask them. When you see injustices, go out and correct them. When you dream up a solution, pursue it and put it on the table and fight for it. That is the way. And it's only if you do that, only if you push to see how far you can go, that you're going to find out that you have gone as far as you can and you've made the difference. That will make all the difference, my friends. And I hope you have a great adventure and have some fun while you're doing it. Thank you very much.